Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to some more Warpforge. And I've been owing you a deck guide for Aveline, my Aveline tempo list. And I'm here to finally bring it to you. I played her quite a bit, just getting her in the raid, but not having access to the new cards until everything was said and done. And as most people know, Sisters of Battle got a huge boost from this reinforcement. And even though Junith and Erica were toned down a bit, none of the new cards were touched. And I think that was a bit of a topic of discussion. But before I get ahead of myself, I'm just excited to bring you an Aveline Tempo deck guide. It is very different in terms of playstyle and its strengths and weaknesses from typical Sisters of Battle builds. And so if you're kind of not a fan, which this is very much me, of sort of slower, grindier kind of Sisters of Battle gameplay that tends to be more kind of control and just like kind of going towards the late game. This is very different, and I think this appeals to more kind of like quicker games, but still has that Sisters feel, still takes advantage, and I think accelerates some of their weaknesses towards strength when it comes to like answering in a tempo way, playing flank threats, and all of that good stuff. So I think if you're interested in that kind of build and that sort of gameplay, sort of like Eldar, sort of orcs in a way where you just got like a lot of tempo threats, but then you can slam some pretty big threats yourself, and then get some of the faith advantage there. I think this is going to be a really great deck for you. And we haven't put up a ton of videos on the channel, mostly been streaming. So I'm excited just to go over the build today, maybe even talk about how this can do into what I think is kind of an emerging meta, even just from a little bit of my streams this week. And thinking about if Ultramarines and Tau might come back into the fold a little bit, how that might hamper or help the Sisters. And then we'll just look at 3 battle logs, 2 wins and a loss, and just kind of talk about, why that was and what some of the reasons to play this build are. I think Aveline is going to be the leader that I'm going to play the most for Sisters of this season because I just like the play style. So thanks for sticking with the channel. Thanks for showing the support. Still working towards that 1K subscriber goal on YouTube. So if you like what you're seeing and want to see more, feel free to do that. And feel free to join as a member. Once we get a little bit more content going, I definitely want to have more videos on the channel for members as well. So thanks for being here. Let's get into it. So what are Aveline's main strengths and weaknesses? So just to start, for those who may not have her or know her, her prey ability is very unique. Every other warlord is able to essentially prey on itself, right? So it gives itself a buff. It can potentially give a unit a buff, or in the case of Morven, right, you can always deal 1 damage to something. Celestian Sacrosanct Aveline breaks that mold because this has to be a friendly troop. It's not unit, right? So you can't just buff yourself. Obviously, that would be pretty incredible because this is a permanent buff. And so it breaks the mold. And what it means is that generally, if you're trying to prey, and I thought about this a couple different ways when first testing her, you're either trying to chuck out a unit every turn and buff it, or you're going to lean into her ability and not so much her prey. So Demon Breaker, giving +1 melee, blast 1, and shield to your warlord until the next turn. And if you hit 8 faith, and I go back and forth. I mean, I think, you could lower it, but maybe that would be a little too broken. When you get to start stacking this, and unfortunately you don't really see that in the games today because it's not a typical win condition for the deck, it is crazy good because you can scale really insanely into the late game where you're just dealing with their entire board and hitting their warlord with Demon Breaker. However, that has to kind of be ideal, and you have to get not stunned, so you don't really want to rely on it. But what she can do is either buff an early unit and prey, and basically make your opponent choose between clearing the unit and stopping you from preying, right? Or you're using Demon Breaker and not really playing anything out on potentially like the first turn or second turn, and just using this as a free kind of bonk to hit their unit and clear it, put a little chip damage on the warlord. Obviously, you can see, particularly into Junith, right? This allows you to clear her Sister of Battle and also stop her from preying. So Demon Breaker actually has a really nice, counter into Junith in particular. and I think does well into matchups that sisters typically don't do well in. So Celestian, Sacrosanct, Aveline, what a mouthful. Aveline is really offering something quite different from what sisters typically are doing. Okay, we know what Aveline does. Let's get into how her deck build really differs from other Sisters of Battle builds. So you're going to see at the top of the curve, we've got Arcoflagellant. This being able to be pumped into a 3 attack flanker, the fact that you can pump the ranged and therefore proc it on ranged units is actually a really nice bonus. This is something you're not going to be running out on your first turn, but is going to do some work and actually synergizes pretty well with Death Cult Assassin, which, as someone who has never liked this card, is pretty crazy that it actually can do quite a bit of work in this build. You've also got the new Sacred Rose Sister. I went back and forth for a while on is this good enough, because when you draw it late game, it's pretty meh. But when you open, especially if you're on the draw and you do take the 1 faith defense, because I don't have the 40 Forge card, which is a huge boon for any Sisters of Battle deck. Sacred Sister still is a big problem, right? Because you play it, you buff it, and it's got a little bit of a stat buff already if you've got the 1 faith. And then your opponent really needs to clear this, because if you just start praying and shielding itself, right, you're just going to get free faith. So it is pretty much a guaranteed, if you play it out turn 1 and buff it, they have to prioritize it, right? So I think that's where Sacred Rose Sisters, strength tends to come from. And then, of course, Amalia, finally have all the legendaries for Sisters of Battle. It took quite a while to get, is just excellent. You can even run it down on a 3 if you're not going to enable this and you have her in your opening hand, and that's totally fine. She becomes a 4/4/4 on 3 energy with Aveline, which is not bad. And then Celestian, a card that I've really despised for quite a while, does a really good job in this deck, right? I can just throw this out. Let's say my opponent hasn't done something early. I can buff it to be a 2/4/4. Then if they don't clear this, it's going to start shielding. It's going to get more stats, or I'm going to be able to put stats somewhere else. And I think the real key here is just having cheap, relatively efficient, praying units, or units that benefits from stats that then they have to make this hard choice between stopping you from accumulating faith on your warlord or making sure that the unit dies so it doesn't snowball. And so it's just really important that we snowball early. That's why we've got some 2-drops. We've got a huge amount of 3-drops, right? So whether it's Celestian, Death Cult Assassin, which, it's not getting health, right? Honestly, this card's really, really great in Erica, but it's still fine. We give it 1 ranged. It can potentially trade a little bit of damage there. You're usually going to get, 2 to 4 damage out of it already. It does have camo, which is kind of nice when you know how to play around certain lines against certain matchups. But then I would say, the 3-drop that we all have come to love, Ministorum Priest, which can make your warlord hit for, +3, and then if you use your Demon Breaker, then you're hitting for 6. And this guy's got 4 health. Perfect stat line, right? I can make this a 4/4/4 as well. So that's really what you're trying to accomplish in the early game. Give them hard choices, make them choose between the unit and your face, and you will start to get, some amount of advantage. Miraculous Feat, no secret, everyone hates this card because it's so annoying to play against in the late game. Obviously, early you don't want to see this, but later on, getting 3 faith is never going to be that hard because we also have relics, of course, and being able to buy time for some sort of way to close out the game is obviously going to be great. It's also pretty cheap. Rite of Restoration, cheap, efficient, great legendary. Cleansing Flames, you can really pressure and make it hard for your opponent to deal with the fact that you can spread 3 damage around, and you also can give Blast 1 to your Warlord with the Demon Breaker ability and clearing out boards really with no problem. Relics, of course, you're just going to play it if this can get you to the 4 breakpoints, get you to the 8 faith breakpoints. Nothing to say there. Seraphim, just exactly what you want to do. Basically, after you pass, your first 2 turns, you're just going to try and chuck out Seraphim. You're going to try and chuck out things like the Zephyrim Superior, which is just so good, and we'll talk about that for a second. And potentially Adelaide Serene when she does have her flank as well. And you're just going to be buffing your flank units or, you know, in Zephyrum's Superior's case, you know, running her out and probably drawing a card almost every time. And really just being able to address your opponent's board while buffing with your ability so that they want to stop you from praying, and making them trade, you know, take really bad kind of trades overall. And then if you've snowballed at all in the early game, and we'll see that in one video, Rhino is just going to run away with the game. And that's why this card is so good. The stats and the cost, it's very cheap. If you get your 2-3 and you've got your Warlord and a unit to pray and you play Rhino, it's just so hard for your opponent to deal with that. There are certain decks that can. Obviously, Chaos comes to mind. Even maybe some of the Ultramarine builds with Storm Raven. But it's just generally going to win you the game outright if you snowball early. Astrid, just again, great legendary. Obviously, with a lot of Sisters builds, you really just want as many legendaries as you can. And she's really great. Obviously, big target on her face. You could buff her. You get the shield off of her. That's a really nice little combo. Divine Intervention, obviously very important. When you're starting to get towards 9 energy, you just always have to worry about your opponent getting to that 8 break point. And then, you know, going like Relics into Divine Intervention if they've gotten some early faith. And this card is just excellent. Now, Zephyrum Superior. Let me talk about why I love this card. Not only is it a common, and I just love when commons kind of like really play a role well. Having a flanker that I can make a 5/5/5, great. It's flying. It's got flank. It's going to be a problem. They're probably going to have to trade some health into it off their Warlord, maybe a unit. But the fact that you just play this on an empty board and draw a troop, because flank and prey are just so powerful together, it's perfect, right? So potentially I can get two preys going, and then they want to take care of the Superior. This card is just excellent. It's so much better than Zephyrum. It's not even funny. And I just have felt like this is a huge boost to this kind of aggro tempo playstyle, because being able to guarantee drawing a troop means that I don't have to run any of the draw cards, and I can just run double Superior and be really, really happy to do that. Then Adelaide, no secret, the card's just excellent, whether it's getting you up to the faith breakpoint or you're playing a giant shielded flyer that they're always going to have to trade 5 health on from their Warlord, likely to clear. The card's just excellent and does exactly what it should be doing. Saint Celestine, always a really obnoxious card to deal with. Of course, then Triumph. And then for the uber late game, and I still think it's pretty necessary, you've got Exorcist. And I think with a lot of Sisters builds running around, especially in Legendary, because, you know, most people are going to have all of the cards that they need, Exorcist can just win you the game. Essentially, you've got 2 board wipes in your deck. Exorcist and your Divine Intervention, and you're going to need both, especially if you're playing into other Sister matchups. So that is the deck build. Now, let's get into some games. Okay, so here we're going to showcase kind of the matchup against Junith, which we're definitely going to run into often, I'm sure. But I love this matchup, personally. I think it's pretty favored for Aveline because of her particular build. Here, I think keeping Relics is just never bad, right? I mean, this is just going to turn on a lot of cards in your deck. But definitely pitching the rest makes sense. And it's nice, like having a 3-drop is just so important. 2 drops, it kind of goes back and forth unless it's Rose Sister. And here, I'm just going to take the free bonk. Obviously, don't want to play out Flagellant. There's just like really no point to doing that. So we get to take the 3-for-0 trade, which honestly adds up a lot if your opponent doesn't have a lot of proactive things to do. So they're going to obviously pray for themselves. And I think you could play this a few different ways, right? We could use Demon Breaker to kill their Battle Sister. But here I basically say, you know what? You can take the faith. I'm going to establish my own board here and maybe make you have to play to me. That's not always going to be right. But here I just felt like that this was not going to be that problematic, because they take this line where they're going to pray. And we've got ways to interact with it. So I actually, although they're up on faith, I think that we end up, you know, ahead because we've got our Celestine already established. All right, so this is just a perfect cleansing flame. And then I get to pray and buff here, or sorry, hit rather. Thinking of future turns, but then I get to pray here, and now this is going to be a problem, right? This is just kind of guaranteed faith if they're not spending things to do. So Hallowed Martyrs, always annoying to play through. And it does get them a decent advantage here. But we've still got the Celestine here, you know, posing as a bit of a problem. And getting some chip damage because we can also buff it. And then we get to play my favorite new card, the Zephyrim Superior. I'm just a sucker for aggro card advantage. Draws us into the Rhino. And we're kind of off to the races. And what's nice is that we can play away from the Hallowed Martyrs and make them have to attack us to disrupt the preying that we're already doing. So we're just in an excellent, excellent spot here because of the line that we took. So they do get to disrupt those two prayers, but we're going to get our second faith here. And then remember what I said about playing Rhino on a board that has more than one, prayer. So we're going to get 3 Battle Sisters that are going to get the extra stat because we're at 2 faith. And I think pretty much into any opponent, if this is the board state, good luck winning the game. So, and then I can shield myself as well instead of, playing another Sacred Rose Sister. Probably could have just played out another Sister. I was kind of thinking maybe if they are able to board wipe, why spend resources doing that? And then, sure, they can Beacon of Faith to maybe, have a little bit more stats to work with, but essentially the game is just over from this point of view. So this is definitely one of like the most high roll kind of things you can do. And because of our matchup into Junith, our opponent just concedes. So, I would say that's not really a showcase of Aveline. That's more of a showcase of the power of the new reinforcement. So let's get into our second game here. Okay, so we're definitely going to see quite a bit of Space Marines, at least for the next week. But I'm also thinking that we're going to see them for the rest of the season. And I think that there are some really good aggro tempo builds that Space Marines have access to. I don't think the reinforcement has really given them much more from what I can see, but it's still early days. But we're definitely going to have to play into them quite a lot, so it's a good matchup to see. So again here, it'd be nice if we had a Sacred Rose Sister, but we don't. And I opted for Holy Fire because I just imagine we're going to have to be dealing with their units. And I don't have a Sacred Sister in hand to really care about the one faith. And here I know that they're probably going to try and aggress me. So we get to save 2 health there, which is nice. And then we have a really easy way to clear their Stern Guard, which is pretty sick too. So I was actually on the other side of this matchup, and it was a really close game. We ended up winning. But I actually think Aveline can have some pretty nice lines to combat other aggro tempo builds. But yeah, here they're just, doing some codexing, doing some drawing. And we're just going to, start deploying our flank threats pretty much next turn and then kind of play from there. So getting a bunch of our 3-drops, but we can just play Seraphim. Not that it matters too much here, but we can buff and then just melee in order to only take 2 damage. And yeah, then we've got our Zephyrim Superiors and a lot we can do. Opponent chooses to stop us from praying, which honestly I was pretty happy about, because now I know I can trade by buffing the Seraphim. I could just trade those units. And I think it's close here. I opt to play the Superior and just use her to clear the unit. I could have also prayed, but we've got plenty to do in our hand, so I figured it was just better to clear the unit. And here, they make their trade there. What's nice with Aveline is anything at 2 health, because I'll have at least 2 ranged, I can clear for free, not take any trade damage using my ability. So here I just opt to play down an Assassin, which will maybe make it a little annoying for them to develop the board. I could have also played Celestine. I think it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. They have a lot of good flank threats, so it's kind of you kind of lose on one side of it. But yeah, so we get the 2 damage there. They clear here. Would have been nice if we got both procs on the Reaver, but it is what it is. And then we get stunned here off the Judiciary, which is pretty bad. And we had a couple different lines here, but I think the easiest for me was just to get back the Death Cult Assassin, play Flagellant, buff Flagellant, and it's a fairly guaranteed chance that we should be able to clear out the Judiciary, because we're going to deal 4 to it minimum. And then we can Demon Breaker to shield ourselves from a damage, because we have nothing else to play. And then hopefully hitting the Cultist finishes this off, and it does. So, took a little bit of a chance, but we sort of like catch back up. Because if we get stunned by Judiciary, it's going to be really, really bad. So they take the 2 here. And then just develop with Calcius, which got the buff to the ranged ability. This card is just... Before, it was always like relatively decent. And getting even a small stat change, I think, is pretty nice. But still not the end of the world. I can guarantee clearing this with my Cultist this turn and hitting. So that's what I'm going to do. And then I can't, unfortunately, deal with the Firstborn. But I can just chuck out double 3-drop just to use all of my energy here in hopes that one of them may live. And then kind of take it from there. We'll say having Exorcist in our hand this game is pretty rough. Because we just are not accumulating faith. But that's sometimes how it is. Most of the time, Exorcist is going to do its job. But here, they also get the Dreadnought plus the Tactical Insight. So, it's at this point that I'm like, okay, we're in some real trouble. Especially because Miraculous Feat also is doing nothing. So, you don't know what different Ultramarine builds are running. I think... this, and then they've got the Avenging Zeal on top of it, which I guess they've had since early days. And it's in this sort of spot where it's going to be really hard for us to come back. I pretty much accept that I can't deal with this because I don't have any removal. And so I need to kill, obviously, the Firstborn. That's huge now. So I just have to do that and then play my Sacred Rose Sister unbuffed, which is pretty sad. And then just kind of hope that I could somehow make my way through this. But then it goes second Dreadnought. And I'm like, okay, well, I should be dead this turn. Because they hit double 2 on this. So they have 14. But they actually just don't see it, thankfully. And they go to clear. Something I do often and did on stream last night. So certainly understand where they're coming from. And really all I can hope for is maybe, divine intervention, but even then, it's just pretty much over. So I just hope that they kind of lose track of how much lethal they have here and just prey on the least statted unit. I get a shield and then Demon Breaker. It's a little, not anti-synergistic, but it's sad that you can't really make use of the double shield, really. And then they play Sicarius. And, it's obviously very, very over for us. So, here, our opponent, I think, did a really good job of getting towards Avenging Zeal. And then they landed that first Dreadnought, really turned on the gas, and then we really couldn't come back. So, I concede that one. So, yeah, unfortunately, we just couldn't really interact enough to get there. So, let's get into the last game now. Okay, and for our final game, we're going to go against an old foe, good old Abaddon. And this hand's fine, right? Like, I never mind really having the Flagellant. We've got 2 3-drops to play out. We always just want to have some early game stuff to do. And they have the cool new season sleeves, which is pretty sick. And so, yeah, just gonna get the free hit here. I could shield myself and not attack, but they're probably going to heal themselves the first turn anyway. Might as well just get the really good attack. But, yeah, they go with this 2-drop, which I don't always see. So, that's going to be their opener. And so, I just decided to throw out a 3-drop here, being the Assassin. knowing that that will probably disrupt a bit of what, you know, this unit if they're trying to develop it. Because a lot of times if you play this 2-drop for the Sergeant, that it can be kind of like a snowball unit. So I'm just happy to see them just kind of trade that straight up. Not happy to see the Noise Marine, because that's just something else we're going to have to deal with. But we do have Flagellant to take it out with the buff, and then we can shield ourselves, so pretty decent sequence. But against Chaos, you know, like, yeah, you can answer their threats, but at some point you just hope to get the tempo back, because if you're just answering what they're playing, there's going to be a breakpoint where you probably can't answer whatever threat they have. So, but, you know, decent early game for us. We're not coming under, you know, pressure that we can't deal with. And Executioner I don't see all that often, but this thing can hit you for 1,000,000. So you basically just have to clear it. And luckily we draw another Flagellant. And so could do this a couple different ways, but I think the best way is I just take the 3, clearing it out, and then have my 3 energy to play Celestian, and hope that we can establish that. But into Chaos, the odds of Celestian living are pretty low. They've got a bunch of melee flankers. And, of course, Possessed Marine gets deployed here. And Chaos Legionary. But sets up a really, really good Cleansing Flame for us. And then we can just use our ability. And then it's good we drew a flanker there, because now we're getting into the 6 energy range. Like, this is, you know, Venom Crawler. Good thing is they used their early free, you know, Dark Pact. So that's pretty good for us. And then I just go for the trade because, you know, if I'm going to get any advantage, it's kind of through chunking them a little bit here and there. Because they're also trying to out-aggress me, because our late game is probably better. But they're actually falling behind on life, which is good for us. So here I got to use the Zephyrim to help clear out good old Leo. Because you cannot let this thing live. It will just hit you for 1,000,000. And then again, I can get it to 2 health. I get to hit it, do a little chip damage on Abby. And so, yeah. I mean, as long as they don't have too many big threats, we're going to be okay here. So they go for the shot off the Sergeant. Or the Legionary, rather. But it hits me, which is nice. Because Chaos doesn't have a lot of flyer interaction, so they're going to have to take the 4 here, dropping them down to 12. And we know we can at least clear the Legionary, which is great. Sadly, Amalia coming with 0 faith is not a great look for us. But we're just going to have to hit there. This is going to get big. And it is terrifying, but there's really nothing we can do. So we just play these out, hoping we can disrupt a bit of their, you know, aggressive game plan, and hope that Noise Marine doesn't kill us. But Drake Strike here thankfully rolls a 6 on us, but a 3 on everything else. It does hit Abby with the Death Cult Assassin, which sucks. And so we almost die here. Almost die here. And smart for them to heal themselves. Like, this getting a buff doesn't really matter. It's probably going to die. And we just got to pray that we can stabilize here. So, obviously have the guaranteed hit. So, we're going to take it, drop them to 8. And then we're just going to Relics. So that Amalia can maybe remove something next turn. Play Astra. This is a great turn for her. And just hope that the shield is enough. We don't really have another choice. And so thankfully, they just play Venom Crawler. And they slam 3 Dark Packs on this thing. And thankfully, we dodge the Vanguard for all 3. So they're just dead. And we end up getting the win here. Very close game, you know. Very, very close. But yeah. We do end up getting the W at the end of all of it. So, Yeah, some interesting games. I would say like not always typical like how these games played out, but you can kind of get a feel for like what you're doing in the early game, which is really just deploying those kind of early. It's mostly like deploying on 3 and 4, mostly using your ability on the first turn, and then trying to use a combination of flank threats, a combination of interaction with like cleansing flame, to really kind of push a little bit of this advantage, get this like chip damage, and then kind of before you know it, if your opponent is not really paying attention, you just end up accruing a pretty decent life advantage. And then if you've got some removal on the right turn, if you can slam one of your bombs, with Adelaide, St. Celestine, or Exorcist, or St. Catherine, then you can sometimes just close it out from there. But I think it's a really fun build. I think it's competitive. It's definitely kind of the third best sister, I would say, but she actually has a pretty great matchup into Junith. Not a good matchup into Erica. Um, so you're kind of 50-50 there. But also, I think you play pretty well into some of the more aggressive builds. I think actually into Ultramarines, she's got a pretty decent shot of clearing some of their early little units and then using the flankers plus her ability to, even though we lost to Calgar in this video, I do actually think that Aveline tempo builds can be pretty well suited to combat some of the more kind of aggro beatdown matchups in the meta. So those are my thoughts. That's the build. I've really liked her. I'm definitely going to continue to play her. And then we'll definitely work on getting some, more Ultramarine content probably rolling pretty soon. But I definitely didn't want to leave her out, and I've really, really enjoyed playing her. And I think there's not a ton to discover with the other Sisters of Battle builds at this point. But I think Aveline is a very different playstyle and very fun, at least for me. That's what I'll say. So thanks for sticking around. Let me know what you think of the video. As always, in the comments, I'll make sure the deck list is there. And I will catch you guys next time.